As Dave said, I'm Josh. I've been a part of Emmanuel and I've been in Sheffield for about coming up to 4 years now. So I've been around the place a bit. I'm really excited today, this morning, to introduce a new series which we're going to be looking at over the next 7 weeks. And that series is on Jonah. Now, there are some things in life which always come together in pairs. So we're going to do a bit of call and response. So Batman and... Brilliant. Fish and salt and good pepper. I didn't know if people would say vinegar after the chips, if it was a bit of a throw people off, but good, you passed the test, you're listening. So Jonah and yay, there we go. So some of you know the story, which is good. So this story of Jonah, it's kind of a classic Bible story. It's about, well, the main headline is Jonah and the whale, and it's something that quite easily, I've got a little book here, which is my Bible. No, I'm joking, it's Isabella's Bible, my daughter. But in here it's got a little Jonah and the whale story, which we read to her. And it's a very classic story that on the surface level, it can kind of look as Jonah kind of disobeys God, gets eaten, swallowed by a whale, chucked out, and then does God's work. And we can kind of look at it as that and think, okay, kind of got it. But actually, when we look into it, it's actually got a much more greater depth to it than we first look at, and a lot more than the 2 pages in this book. As we look into it over the next 7 weeks, and as we kind of dig into it today, I just really encourage you, if you do know this story, or if you've never heard it before, or maybe heard a little bit of it, just to kind of lay aside any assumptions or things that you think you already know, and just to kind of look at it in hopefully a fresh and a new way. And I just want to encourage you to allow hopefully this to challenge you, encourage you and convict in a fresh way. So we're going to get straight into it. If you've got a Bible and you want to open it, we're going to go to Jonah 1, chapter 1, verse 1. Too many ones there. I'm going to read it. So, Jonah 1. Now the word of the Lord came to Jonah, the son of Amittai, saying, Arise, go to Nineveh, that great city, and call out against it, for their evil has come up before me. But Jonah rose to flee to Tarshish from the presence of the Lord. He went down to Joppa and found a ship going to Tarshish. He paid the fare and he went down into it to go with them to Tarshish, away from the presence of the Lord. But the Lord hurled a great wind upon the sea, and there was a mighty storm on the sea, so that the ship threatened to break up. Then the sailors were afraid, and each cried out to his God, and they hurled the cargo that was in the ship into the sea to lighten it for them. But Jonah had gone down into the inner part of the ship, and had lain down and was fast asleep. So the captain came to him and said to him, What do you mean, you sleeper? Arise, call out to your God. Perhaps the God will give a thought to us that we may not die. So in summary, God asks Jonah to do something. Jonah runs the opposite direction, getting on a boat to Tarshish. The Lord then sends a storm. The sailors fear for their lives. Jonah falls asleep. And then the captain wakes him up. So before we kind of get into this passage, I think a really important thing is to understand who Jonah is, why he runs, and why he kind of makes this decision. And this is quite an interesting book because you kind of get chucked straight into the story, but you don't actually know who Jonah really is, or what he's done, or why he might be thinking these things. So we're going to do a little bit of Bible history. Hopefully this doesn't switch anyone off. But Jonah is actually mentioned first in 2 Kings 14, verse 25 to 27, so in a book earlier before Jonah. And what we know is that in 930 BC, before Christ, after Israel's 4th king, we know that the land was split into 2 territories. So there was a northern territory and a southern territory. And Israel was the northern kingdom, and it kind of rejected the kings that came before those 4 kings and kind of started its own way of doing things. And Judah honoured kind of these kings before and continued. We know that Jonah then appears kind of 200 years after this split. So he comes on the scene at about 730 BC, and he's an Israelite, and he lives in this northern kingdom. And in those 200 years between this kind of split, the northern kingdom had essentially just been battered by war, by poor leadership. It was a place that was in poverty, that there wasn't much security. As I said, there were poor leaders making poor decisions. And in particular, this Assyrian army had kind of been picking off land from Israel. And the Assyrians were a really powerful nation at the time, really, and they were feared. They were a massive nation in the ancient world. They were very brutal. They did some horrific things to the people they caught or to their enemies. And they were basically the biggest threat to Israel in this 200-year period. They were constantly kind of causing trouble and causing issues. And we know in verse 25 of this King's passage that it says that kind of Jonah came onto the scene, that he grew up in Israel, he grew up in Gath-Hepher, and that he basically would have grown up in this period of kind of helplessness and insecurity and seeing leaders make poor decisions. And he would have grown up in an unstable nation, a nation that wasn't quite as it should be and what it was before. However, we get to this point where actually a new king has kind of come on the scene. So there's Jeroboam II, and he's basically come onto the throne, and his whole mantra is like, make Israel what it was before, make it great, make it strong, make it as it should be. So it kind of, hopefully not Donald Trump vibes there of make Israel great again. But but that was his thing. He was like, right, we need to sort ourselves out. Our borders are a mess. We have no control over anything. The armies are picking off our territory. So he comes in and he basically secures the borders, secures the nation, and brings peace and brings security to the nation. And Jonah was the appointed prophet from God who prophesied to Jeroboam about what would happen. And it's interesting just to note that Jeroboam, it says he did evil in the sight of the Lord, yet the Lord still used him and his kind of reign to bring peace and prosperity to Israel. So it's just an interesting point that God's kind of above a lot of these, powers and things on the earth. God is above that and can still use them for his purposes. So, Jonah was a prophet, and he's not just any prophet. He's a prophet he's got quite a lot of baggage. He's got quite a lot of frustration towards what's been going on to the Assyrians. And this is kind of where the story begins. So we've got this bit of context to who Jonah is. So the first thing I want to say about God is God speaks and God sends. So in this passage in Jonah, it says the word of the Lord came to Jonah, and it said to arise and go to Nineveh. And God communicates to his people. He always has and he always will. He's not a distant, nor is he a far God, but he's a God that engages with us. And I think that's something we can quite easily forget. We can sometimes think he's kind of over there, or that he only speaks at certain times, or that we can't, whatever, there's barriers or whatever, but actually God is a speaking God. And the second thing is God sends, and God sends us. The first verse, God's not passively waiting for something to happen. He engages and he speaks and he sends Jonah. And again, God's always been a sending God. He wants to use us. He wants to send us to places to do his work. And he doesn't need to send us. He doesn't need to use Jonah in this case. He could have easily sent someone else or done it himself, whatever it was going to be. But he loves to use us and send us to do his will. And this is a consistent pattern throughout the Bible. We see in the Old Testament kind of Abraham, Moses, disciples being sent. And that's the same for us. We are to be sent. We are to be sent to do God's will. So where and why? Where was Jonah being sent, and why was he being sent there? So there should be a map. So he was going to be sent to Nineveh. Now, Nineveh was essentially the capital city of Assyria. So this horrific nation that had been absolutely causing lots of trouble for Israel. This is where God was sending Jonah to Nineveh. And it was quite a long journey north of Israel. It was the largest recorded city on earth at the time that we know of. Again, the Assyrians were like immoral, brutal idolaters. They were like horrific people. You can read in history as well, not of what they did. It was horrific. And God's basically saying, Jonah, this nation that you've almost been had all these issues with, you've now got your nice peaceful borders, you're now all sorted. I want you to go out of that, and I want you to go to your enemies, and I want you to share the good news of God. So God's asking him to go to the very people he fears and probably hates. And as we know, all these things, all this baggage of what's happened before, he would have been like, oh, like, no. And I think this picture, I think, is designed to challenge us. I think it kind of is that picture of where would we not want to be sent by God? Where would we not feel comfortable? It's like, we'll follow you, but we won't go there, or that's too far of a stretch. And practical things could be speaking to someone who just outright mocks your faith, who just takes the mick, who's just really frustrating at work, or someone who just is really frustrating, and we're just like, no, I'm not even going to bother. Or it might be that neighbour who you try and have a conversation, and an hour later they're still talking and you haven't said a word. And it could be someone from a different background or a different worldview, or someone who's got a different viewpoint to you. What are the limits of our obedience to God's will and what he's asking us? And a great picture of someone who does this well was Jesus. Jesus had such a great habit of stepping out of the boundaries of us and them. The Pharisees could not get their heads around why he was eating with the sinners and the people who they wouldn't converse with or do anything with. And we need to be careful that we don't fall into this kind of, oh, this is us and that's them, or this is the people I'll share my faith with, or this is the people I'll do this, but those people, just don't fancy it. We need to be really careful we don't fall into that. And ultimately, what's God's heart behind this? What's God's heart behind him sending Jonah? Was it a test? No. God sends Jonah because he loves Nineveh. He loves this nation that is full of dangerous, immoral people who don't honour God in any way. They don't deserve anything from God on paper, but he loves them because they're people made in the image of him. And he wants to reach those people. He's a compassionate God, and he loves people. And God has a heart for cities. We see that throughout the Bible. And this should give us real hope for Sheffield, as we're here in the city of Sheffield, and it's a city full of people made in God's image, of people that God loves and wants to be in relationship and wants to save and wants to know. And part of our values here at Emmanuel is about courage, honour and generosity, and I think all of those link to that. How can we be courageous? How can we honour Sheffield? How can we go into Sheffield and be generous with our time, with our money, with whatever it is, and share what we've got? So God speaks, God sends. So the next question is, how does Jonah respond? So it says in verse 3 that Jonah rose to flee to Tarshish from the presence of the Lord. He went down to Joppa and found a ship. He paid the fare. He went down into the ship, and he said, as he thought, away from the presence of the Lord. So Jonah's response is like immediate. It's not, there's no obedience at all. And when I read the Bible, I like to think of what doesn't happen. So we see here Jonah straight away, I'm off. So what doesn't he do? He doesn't kind of think about it or wrestle with God or ask God. He doesn't seek counsel from people. He doesn't pray or fast. It's just an instant, no, I'm off, I'm out. And he's clearly just running away from the presence of God. And the book of Jonah is quite ironic in the way it's written. It's kind of, we say God essentially says to go east, which is to where Nineveh is. I don't know, east, and then let's say that's east. And then west, he goes west to Tarshish, to the complete other side. And Tarshish was I can't remember if the map's gone, but it was literally the end of the earth in that context. It was completely the other way. He goes down into the boat, he goes down to Joppa, he goes down, and God's saying, go up, arise. There's all this kind of pictures of what he's not doing. And this isn't in our Hebrew series that we've just finished. There was a bit of one of the key messages was about drifting away from God and kind of how as we go on we can kind of drift. This is like not a drift. This is a clear outright, I'm out, I'm gone. And he deliberately runs the other way. And the ironic thing is Jonah was a prophet. He would have known Israel's history. He would have known about King David, who was a great king. And King David writes in Psalm 139, verse 7 to 9, a very famous psalm, and he says, I can never escape from your spirit, O Lord. I can never get away from your presence. If I go up to heaven, you're there. If I go down to the grave, you're there. If I ride the wings of the morning or dwell by the farthest oceans, you're there. So it's quite there's just ironic and lack of I don't really know what Jonah thought he was doing, if he actually thought he could get away or if he's just like, I'm just going to try anyway. But there's this complete I've just got to get away. And I think it's a challenge kind of to us as well. When God asks something of us, what's our response? What do we do? Do we just bolt? Do we get out? Or do we consider it? And this running that Jonah did, it has a cost to it. We know there was an earthly cost of him paying a fare to get onto a boat, and obviously a social, he was leaving his whole life. It was like, I'm completely going. But the spiritual cost was that fleeing the presence of God, of removing his relationship, of removing that access, just literally trying to do anything he can to get away from God. And there's a cost. And Jonah, again, he never verbally responds that we know of in the book. It's just actions and loud actions of disobedience and paying a price. And I think that we can often do this as well, in probably quieter ways maybe than Jonah. But perhaps you do feel prompted to have a conversation with someone at work or on the street or wherever it is, and you just delay it, and you just keep putting it off, and then eventually you just don't do it. Or you've got things that you need to deal with about forgiveness. You need to forgive someone, but you just put it off and you choose to hold on to it, and there's the guilt and there's the cost of that. Or perhaps you sense God kind of leading you to step out into something new, into something he's asked you, but you choose comfort instead. You choose to stay where you are. And this is not kind of new behaviour. We see this a lot in the Bible with the Israelites, where they're called to come out of Israel and go into the promised land, and they spend 40 years doing what should have been a 9-day journey. A whole generation of people missed out of the promised land because of this disobedience, because of running. What are we running from today? Let's not miss what God's got for us. God's got such good things for us. Let's not run away from it. Let's run to it. Let's run to the Father. So, what happens next? The pursuit. So here's the good news. Jonah runs, goes completely the opposite direction, but God doesn't give up. And it says that he held a great wind upon the sea, and there was this storm that kind of was shaking the ship and everything. And I think when you first read it, you can think, oh, God's really angry. He's held a storm. He's fuming at Jonah. But it's completely the opposite. It's God threw this storm out of a pursuit to get Jonah's attention. It was drastic because he loves Jonah and he loves Nineveh, and he wants this, the mission that he's called Jonah to do, to succeed. And he desires Jonah to come back to him. He desires to draw him back to himself. And God allowed these circumstances to challenge Jonah's resistance. And actually the greatest tragedy in this would have been if God hadn't pursued Jonah, if it had just been like, off you go, I'm done with you, go to Tarshish, I'm done. That would have been the worst thing. And that's not in God's nature. That's not what he does. He pursues us. And again, this is what we see. We see the heart of God, the nature of God, that he wants to draw him back and he wants to use him. And like I said earlier, he could have asked someone else. He could have done it himself. But he wanted Jonah to do. And I think sometimes in our lives, God does allow disruption. And we don't always understand why. And we don't always know if it is. But I think it's always something to look at. And I think for me, I had an example of when I was 18, I was kind of looking at what the next steps, do I go to uni, whatever, and I'd really wanted to be a doctor. I kind of did all the university applications, got all my place and was ready to go, and then And then, didn't get the grades. And I was like, oh, Lord, I thought you were telling me to be a doctor, done all this. It was all set. And then, bang, like, what do I do now? What do I do now? And I didn't know what to do, really. I was like, well, I'll just do a gap year or whatever. And it was one of those moments where I just felt kind of everything that I planned, my whole future, kind of just gone. And I was like, what do I do? And I'm now very thankful, having a wife as a doctor, that I'm not also a doctor. Great work, but probably not for me. Very glad God got me out of that one. Not every circumstance and not every issue or thing that comes up will be that, but it's always worth spending time asking God, why is this happening? What are you trying to show me? Because he might be just trying to get your attention. And again, when this storm happens, we kind of see again a bit of kind of irony in the story, that we see Jonah kind of fast asleep in the depths of the boat, yet we see these sailors working together, praying to their gods, that they're just like, oh, we just need to do something, we're just going to pray. And we see the captain kind of go down and wake and shake Jonah up and be like, pray, like do something, And he uses the exact same word of arise, which God used when he first asked me. He said, arise, get up. And the captain says the same thing. And it's just interesting how sometimes that can be like us, that you can almost see it and you're like, oh, Jonah, the prophet, the man of God, like, why is he not on his knees? Why is he not praying? Why is he not telling other people about this God and getting them to pray to this God? And there's just this kind of, real visible, he's just completely running. He's completely gone the other way. And it's an interesting thing, because sometimes the ones who don't know God, or the people that we think, oh, they don't know God, or then, what are they doing? They're actually so much closer to knowing God and seeking God in their hearts than we think. And it's not up to us to decide who is and who isn't, or who's a good person that might be up for hearing or who isn't. We don't know what's going on in their hearts. And ultimately, these non-believing sailors pointed Jonah almost back to God, of pointing him of what he should have been doing. So with this storm for Jonah, in our lives, what does it take for us to be awakened? What does it take for us to get God's? What does it take for us to get attention from God? For us to get, for God to get our attention. Let's learn from this and not let Jonah's failures teach us that kind of we have to go the other way and it has to get to this drastic point. Actually, let's draw near to God now. Let's go to him. Let's come to him and draw near. And ultimately, I think with this whole book and with a lot of the Old Testament, is that actually this picture points us forwards to Jesus. It's not just a comparison of obedience of, oh, Jonah should have done this and now he's come back, but actually it's a picture of God's pursuit and God's heart. And again, like I said, the greatest danger was never the storm. The greatest danger was running without God, with fleeing from God's presence. And Jonah tries to run, but God pursues him to the ends of the earth. How much more does God go after us? How much more does he love us to go after us? And we know how much. He sent his son. He sent his son, Jesus, who pursued us to death on a cross, the furthest someone could go for us, for each one of us. In Jesus, God steps into our failure, our running, our resistance. He pays the price. And Jesus, when he was on this earth, showed us how we can accept and live in the will of God up to death. He endured the cross. It says in Hebrews 12, it says, he endured the cross for the joy set before him. The joy of bringing people like me and you back to himself, back into relationship. Yes, it cost him, but it was for the joy of knowing us and saving us. And Jesus promises that he will never leave us or forsake us through all the moments, through all the seasons of God's life. God is present and he's there. And he's not just in the ups and the downs, he's present in all the moments of our lives. We have a God that pursues us and has just shown how far he will go for us by his son on the cross. And because he pursues us, because he's done that, he invites us to follow him and to live with him. So, in summary, God speaks, and God sends, because he loves people, even the ones we often struggle to love. We often run, sometimes loudly, sometimes quietly, but this always comes at a cost. But the good news is God pursues us. He doesn't give up on us. He's paid the price for us. And that's an eternal for anyone. No one misses out. And in Jesus, we see that. It's not just chasing us, but giving his life up so we can live in relationship and live the life he's paid for us. So in response, I've just got a couple of things just to think about as we've just of what I've said today. So the first thing is God speaks and God sends. Where perhaps is God speaking into your life today? What's he got to say? And the second thing is running, it has a cost. Where might you be running? What might be the things you're running from? Avoiding or delaying or resisting? Resisting what you know he's perhaps asked of you. There might be things that we need to deal with and come to God with. Because often running, there's no conversation, it's just there's been no conversation, there's been no engagement. Perhaps you need to engage with God today and ask him. Ask him why. He's a big God. He's not just going to say, go and do this, and he'll have he'll give you all you need. He'll give you if it's confirmation, if it's counsel. And maybe for some, the most important thing to hear today is that you're not too far gone. Perhaps you don't know God at all. Perhaps you think you're too far gone. Perhaps you've known God and you are running and you think you've gone too far. It's not true. You're never too far gone. God hasn't given up and he's pursuing you today. So, how will you respond? How will you respond to the call of God? So, I'll just give just a minute just to think about those things. I think they're on the slide, and then if the worship team just want to come up and we'll sing a song in response. But I just encourage you again. God is good. He's given us his Spirit to live with what he's asked us to do, to strengthen us, to empower us. And it can be scary, I guess. The whole reason often we run can be out of fear, but actually we don't need to fear what God's got for us. It's good. He's a good Father. He loves us.